Hello, imperfect leaders. It's summer! And for leaders, that means reflection. And it means planning for the coming year. It is for that reason that this week's episode is an encore episode specifically picked with your upcoming year in mind. And then as Labor Day approaches, Season 3 will kick off. And I'm so excited about that because Jamie Almanzán from the Equity Collaborative is going to be joining me as a co-host and commentator. It is going to be great. So sit back and enjoy this encore presentation of An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast. At the end of every interview that we have for teacher candidates, we will say, "What questions do you have for us?" And they will always ask, "Well, what kind of support can I expect?" And we will always say, "Well, don't worry, we'll give you a mentor." But it's not real mentorship. I mean, it's support with the difficult kid or the field trip form or the grade card, but it isn't coaching. That's where partners like EdConnective step in. They provide observation and feedback with practice. That's real coaching. Their mission is to ensure that every student thrives by facilitating exceptional educator growth. So whether it's science of reading, whether it's leadership development, whether you're trying to build the best recruitment and retention efforts, check out edconnective.com. My guest today talks about his experience renaming a mascot from a stereotypical one, offensive to us all, especially to First Nation and Native communities. I was superintendent presiding over the renaming of Robert E. Lee Elementary School in Missouri, and that was interesting. And I was most recently on a renaming committee here in the Seattle area. The renaming of a school or a mascot can be really challenging. The committee process here in the Seattle area was so well conceived and thoughtfully carried out by one of the district's leaders, Amii Thompson. She made sure to make decisions with those most impacted by that decision, and in this case, the Suquamish Tribe. If you're renaming a school, I highly recommend contacting her for a really smooth process. Okay, so now imagine if you were the principal and your school board decided on a Thursday night to remove the mascot effective immediately. My guest is Andrew Dolloff, and his after-action review is exactly about that. Thanks for tuning in. Today on An Imperfect Leader, Dr. Andrew Dolloff is my guest. Andrew's been the superintendent of schools in Yarmouth, Maine since 2014. He's a 35-year veteran of the Maine public schools, having begun his career as a chemistry teacher and a basketball coach in central Maine before moving into central administration in the greater Portland area in 1996. And Andrew has been a superintendent, an assistant superintendent, an assistant principal, high school principal, and an athletic administrator. And now, for 9 years, he has served a community that is deeply personal to him. His grandfather graduated from Yarmouth High School. And no doubt, leading in a hometown district must have made it even more meaningful when he was named Maine's Superintendent of the Year in 2021. Andrew Dolloff, welcome to An Imperfect Leader.
Thanks, Peter. I'm honored to be here, particularly since my own performance over the past 35 years aligns so well with the title of your podcast. So thanks for having me.
We'll definitely get into that. You know, Andrew,
Yeah.
on your website, you mention authors and educational researchers like Doug Reeves and Pedro Noguera and Richard Elmore, and each of them challenges leaders to agitate for change. And they also appear to recognize the truth that when a leader advocates for change, that the system will work aggressively to return to status quo. And in your own book, The Trust Imperative, you take a practitioner's approach to building, positive and enduring cultures. And so my question for you is, what are some ways that you have designed your system to show that culture is so important?
I'm very fortunate to have been asked 9 years ago to lead a school district that had already benefited from excellent leadership for many years prior to my joining the team. So it's not so much that I've designed the system, but it's allowed me to learn from others the true meaning of empowerment and collaboration, and focus my energies on continual improvement, both of myself and of the organization. While I always believe that the culture of the school is critical for student learning, one of the biggest lessons I've learned about fostering that culture is the importance of a clearly stated, collaboratively developed, commonly understood mission, along with a set of core values for the school. I believe that if we start each day and each year with a clear understanding of where we're headed and the expectations by which we will perform to get there, then we create opportunities for ourselves and, more importantly, for our students to perform at increasingly impressive levels. In my book and in presentations that I've been doing around the country, when speaking with school leaders or teaching at the graduate level, as I do for aspiring school leaders, I talk about some very specific ways to ensure that your mission is central to all that you do. And I have to say, Peter, I didn't fully appreciate its importance, certainly through the early years of my leadership career. But working in high-performing organizations like the Yarmouth School Department, where the mission drives the work, has really allowed me to realize the necessity if you want to take your school to the next level or to the highest level that it can reach.
It's interesting. You've said a couple of things that sort of resonated as you were talking. I thought, first of all, Brene Brown speaks about clear is kind, right? So having a really clear focus and being really clear on having that shared image of what success looks like. I agree. When I first became superintendent, the idea of a mission statement was sort of, let's just do that very quickly. And when you recognize that that mission statement serves as a compelling purpose, what is it that we're doing for children? How do we want to be together? And what are we going to create together? And everything that you've just said is about that togetherness, that collaborative work around creating shared goals and doing that work together. I like to think of myself as where I've learned more over time how to be a better systems thinker. And it seems that that's important to you as well. And actually, one of the most important habits of systems thinking is avoiding the impulse to make quick decisions. You preach this in your book as well. You call it restraint, composure, and courage. Why is it important to pause first? And also, why courage?
Well, first of all, I think I talk a lot about restraint because I wasn't very good at it early in my career. And it remains a challenge for me today. Two of my favorite quotes come from a couple of our former presidents, President Kennedy and President Lincoln, that really go to this point. And I try to keep them fresh in my vision here at work, in my workspace, but in my memory as well. And so the first one was, when President Kennedy was speaking to the graduating class of Yale in 1962. And if you haven't read that speech, it's a fantastic speech because he's a Harvard man speaking at Yale. And he plays on that quite a bit in the speech. But, one of the things that he says is, too often we enjoy the comfort of opinion without the discomfort of thought. And boy, we see that on a regular basis, not just in school leadership, but just in general, especially now with the growth of social media, right?
I was thinking the same thing in my mind. What would he have said with social media?
Right. I mean, we enjoy the comfort of opinion without the discomfort of thought. And a century before that, President Lincoln is often credited with saying, "'Tis better to be silent and be thought a fool than to speak and remove all doubt." Sometimes I think Mark Twain is credited that as well. But
I was going to say, having spent 18 years in Missouri, I think Missourians might say maybe that's Mark Twain.
Yeah. You can find people who will credit either of them. So I like to stick with the presidential route myself. So, but those two quotes really, really speak to me. And while I have failed at it many times in my career, I recognize the importance of that restraint. I think too often as leaders, we think our job is to fix a problem and to find the solution or to correct the error. But we don't realize that in doing so or in taking that approach, we often jump to conclusions or stifle conversation and dominate the airwaves, something that we can't do as leaders. You remember the old E.F. Hutton television ads, the investment broker, and there'd be all this commotion in a room full of people sitting in a smoky lounge or something. And all of a sudden somebody would lean forward to somebody else and say, "Well, my broker's E.F. Hutton." And E.F. Hutton says, and then the room would go completely silent. And everyone would be leaning in to listen to what E.F. Hutton had to say. And I think that is true of effective leaders who show restraint so that when they do speak, people want to listen to what they have to say because they don't view them as being impulsive or dominating the airwaves. They've given other people opportunities. The restraint that I talk about in my book is not just personal restraint, but also professional restraint. So in every situation, in every interaction with others, we either build trust or degrade trust. It goes back to my old coaching and even my playing days when we had a basketball coach who would say to us, you're either going to be better as a player today than you were yesterday, or you're going to be worse. You're never going to be the same 2 days in a row. And I say the same thing around trusting relationships with staff, with parents, with students, with the community, whoever it is. You either build or degrade trust in every interaction that you have with others. And I think, when we're talking about personal trust, showing restraint is one way to build trust with individuals. The professional restraint that I talk about is when I encourage aspiring leaders or even experienced leaders not to jump at every shiny object. There are a lot of great ideas out there for schools, whether it's professional learning communities or later start times for high school or standards-based grading. There are all these great ideas out there, but you can't come in and jump at each one without having built trusting relationships first. I've seen it happen far too often, where a new leader comes in, whether it's at the principal level or the superintendent level, and they say, hey, the American Association of Pediatrics says that high school students shouldn't start school before 8:30 in the morning. So next year, we're starting high school at 8:30, and we're going to flip-flop. The elementary students are going to start first, and then the high school students are going to start later, and this is what we're going to do, and isn't this a great plan? And chaos ensues because there's much more to think about in a community than just the American Association of Pediatrics recommendation.
Yes, if you're a systems thinker, you begin considering all of the unintended consequences of a decision like that.
Exactly.
Our school district,
and I've seen people make that jump, Peter. They haven't shown professional restraint or organizational restraint, so they've jumped into that, and before long, they're working in another district, and the change that they wanted to make in their first district never happens. And so I always encourage leaders, don't sacrifice lasting change for immediate change. When you do that, the change that you make is likely not going to remain in place. You have to build those relationships first.
Tell me briefly about courage.
Well, we go through these things all the time as school leaders, where the decisions that we make are going to be upsetting to one faction or one individual or another. And it really goes back to, I think, Jim Collins in his Good to Great, where he talks about the two most significant characteristics of level 5 leaders, level 5 being the highest level, most effective leader that Collins studied, is strong professional will, which I believe is analogous to courage, and personal humility. And both of those really, really speak to me. I think he nailed it. Obviously, he's done a lot more research in this area than I have. And that strong professional will is something that is developed over time. I believe it takes time to do it effectively because you build coalitions through collaboration and shared decision-making that allow you to stand strong when you are making a decision that is being challenged in a very public, possibly a very emotional way for the individuals that are questioning that decision. Oftentimes, it's going to be discussed in the general media, let alone on social media. And in order to stay the course, in order to pursue the organization's mission, the individuals sitting in the chair, whether it's the superintendent or principal or a leadership team, anybody really involved in having responsibility for the decision, must be courageous. If not, you end up with muddled leadership. And in my book, I talk about the difference between ethical leadership and muddled leadership. And I think muddled leadership is what results when you don't have courage, you don't have conviction, you don't show integrity for the organization, and you end up making your decisions based on whoever screams the loudest or whoever you talk to last.
I appreciate the definition and the expansion in terms of what courage means to you and what it could mean for other leaders, because I was interested to hear whether or not the word or the term or the expression of vulnerability would play a part in there. And it sounds like it absolutely does. It's not courage in the sense of go forward and behave in a way that doesn't consider all of the other pieces and your role as a lead learner, one who admits when they make an error or things like that, but rather courage is all of those things. It's integrity, it's vulnerability, it's strengthen your conviction. It's also the courage to recognize that you don't have to have all of the answers, that the power is in the room or the space and the people you work with.
Yeah. And I think the other, the two pieces I talk about that contribute to one's ability to act courageously are empathy and integrity. And you have to have both of those in significant measure in order to be an ethical leader. And an ethical leader is a courageous leader. And, I've had to strengthen my empathy. I feel like integrity is something that I've possessed throughout my career, in terms of doing what I say I'm going to do and sticking to the mission of the organization. But I will say, and my wife would back this up, that empathy is where I have struggled. I came into the profession being a person driven, to hold people to high standards, hold students to high standards. And, when I went home this year and I took our 8 core values home to my wife, I asked everybody in our organization to do this. I said, take these 8 core values home to your family and talk to them about what they mean to you and what are some that might be most challenging to you. So I set our poster with our 8 core values in front of my wife, and I said, hey, which of these core values do you think I most need to work? And before I got through the sentence, she said, empathy. And I said, hey, you got to let me finish I need to finish the question. And she said, no. I said, I need some examples. And she talked about specific times where my own drive or expectation for high standards or high performance overshadowed empathy. And so I think one of the things that I've tried to do myself, being aware of that, is recognizing that curiosity, as you said, Peter, is one indication of one's humility and empathy for others. I now try to enter meetings actually with a planned set of questions that I have for others about a certain proposal or idea or problem that we're facing, rather than going in thinking, hey, I've got the solution for you. What do you think of this? To go in starting out by asking questions, and asking questions is not something that I would say has been a strength of mine. So to have planned out what those questions might be, which then lead to more questions and more dialogue, has certainly assisted in my own development of greater empathy in decision making.
How does the term an imperfect leader resonate with you?
Well, I think it's probably the most concise and accurate descriptor of my career that I've heard to date. I don't think you can't expect perfection. And people have often asked me in the past year how it felt to write a book about the work that I'm doing. And I have to respond that I didn't write the book because I think I've got it all figured out. And I didn't even write it because I think I've got it figured out more than most other school leaders do. We're all struggling with these things every day. I wrote the book because I enjoy writing, and I've enjoyed observing school leaders really since the time I was a child, watching my father, who was a 28-year school principal in one high school in one setting, and was far more effective and humble than I could ever hope to be. I wrote the book because, as much as I admire and love learning from authors like those you mentioned earlier, Pedro and Douglas Reeves, I felt that there was a voice missing from the literature on school leadership. And that was the voice of the practitioner, somebody who's just doing the work each day and has had the opportunity to observe many other school leaders do things very, very well, and sometimes very, very poorly, and sharing what I've learned from those observations was really why I wanted to write the book. And I think, when people read the book or when they hear me speak publicly, they'll hear somebody talk about the level of imperfection that I have displayed throughout my career. I mean, it is every day is compromise and collaboration and correction, and it's a messy business.
And we'll be right back. Hey, district leaders, I know you already know this. In schools worldwide, cell phones are posing real challenges on student engagement and mental well-being, and I want you to meet Yonder, a proud sponsor of An Imperfect Leader. And let me share this story from a visit I made to some schools in Silicon Valley. I asked some kids what they liked about Yonder, and after some funny looks, they shared that actually, with Yonder, teachers don't have to battle with them over phones anymore. In fact, one kid said to me he didn't have to worry anymore about his parents texting him in class, and the kid next to him sort of shoved him and goes, "Texting? My mom used to FaceTime me in class." I want to introduce you to a support system that increases teaching and learning. I want you to discover why 1 million students choose Yonder daily. Minimize distractions, maximize learning potential. To learn more, go to overyonder.com. YONDR. We're back for segment 2 of An Imperfect Leader called Imperfect Leadership in After Action. My guest is Dr. Andrew Dolloff. He's the superintendent of the Yarmouth Public Schools in Yarmouth, Maine. In this segment, we ask our guests to deconstruct a decision that they had to make, and then we discuss it. So, Andrew, what happened?
Well, I knew you were going to ask this, Peter, so I had thought about a couple of different scenarios. And one is a recent one where I, on my own volition, released to the public in the town in which I'm superintendent the proposed cost of a potential building project, which we thought was going to be $28 million. And several months later, when it came time to really look at a hard estimate, the number had changed to $65 million. So a lot of trust had to be rebuilt with the community that had to vote for this and fund this entire project. So that's one quick one, but I think one that might be worth exploring more because it might have an impact with more folks around the country is a scenario, a case that I went through 25 years ago, where I was a first-year high school principal in a high school where the mascot used Native American imagery and was really, I think, considered to be the most offensive Native American mascot that has been out there. So this wasn't one where the name was Chiefs or Indians, which in and of itself may not be as offensive as the imagery that goes along with it. Ours was actually that most offensive of Native American slurs. So we knew that we should be considering a change. Like I said, this was 25 years ago. So we were certainly the first school in Maine that had such imagery that was looking to make a change or that was considering making a change. And we were one of the first throughout New England at the high school or college level. And so we had done some work for a year or two with students, just starting to educate them a little bit about the offensive-ness of the term and Native American culture, at least in our area, if not, in the larger region and country as a whole. We'd had Native American Awareness Day. We'd brought in some guest speakers and really just trying to nudge things in the direction where we'd be poised to make a thoughtful decision at some point in the near future. Nobody was really pushing us to do this. And obviously, as we started talking about it, there started to be some pushback against it from folks who were longtime residents or alums from the school, proud athletic tradition, making claims that, we're honoring the Native Americans. This shouldn't be offensive or taken as offensive. So we had a lot of education to do. While we started the conversation, the school board became aware of it, and we didn't really engage them I don't think, at the level that we should have. Because what happened was, at a board meeting early in the fall, and this was, again, my first year as the principal, but I had been the director of athletics and activities for the previous 4 years. So I had been involved in the work that had taken place to date. But at a meeting early in the fall, the school board made the decision to do away with the old mascot. And I, as the high school principal, asked for clarification in this public meeting. Are you saying that we're doing away with the mascot at the end of this school year, and we're going to take this school year to determine what the new mascot will be? And they said, no, as of this moment, we are no longer using this mascot.
So just to recap for a second, and I think you are so right. Your first example in terms of the project, the building project, and the estimates that you received is an interesting topic. And I think the topic that we're going to explore today is also interesting because even though it took place 25 years ago, these are the kinds of decisions that are happening right now in terms of renaming schools and replacing or rethinking who are we as a community, and is this mascot still a reflection of the values of this community? And so you're talking about a mascot that represented inappropriately Native or First Nations communities. And as a school district, there were two pieces that were going on. For one, you were taking an approach of a step-by-step, following the model that you talked about in our first segment in terms of enduring change happens step by step. And so being thoughtful about helping those in the community understand why the mascot is inappropriate in today's society. And at the same time, you had a board or committee that appears to have made a very impulsive, just sweeping change that long-term may be the right decision. In the short term was going to create a high level of consternation for you, your staff, and families, as now the ripple effect of a decision has to be managed. So as you look back on this, what got overlooked?
Well, I think you make a great point that the enduring change, it was the right decision. The order of operations wasn't followed, and that made it challenging. It has remained, so it is lasting change. It's been 25 years and they didn't go back. So, kudos to that community. I'm no longer in that community. I became superintendent in another community nearby. But as I look back, I think the first mistake that I would identify for myself is that as the school principal, I was very focused internally on the students, the coaching staff, the teaching staff. We were working within the school to understand the offensive nature of the mascot and to further educate students and staff about the role of Native American culture in our region. We weren't looking beyond the school, which I've really learned is important because those students are there for 4 years at the high school. And they're then going to become, in many cases, the community members that you're working with for decades to come. And we hadn't taken that step. I think we would have gotten there, but we hadn't taken that step yet. The other part of that is we hadn't engaged the school board in the work we were doing with the students. So while they were aware of it, and I can't remember back a couple of decades to know just how much they were aware of the work that we had done, but they certainly hadn't been involved with the students and staff in these conversations. They were having the conversation at their level. So there were silos that were forming.
Yeah, you're speaking of internal and external systems, looking within and everything that's going on there in terms of the relationships between and among systems, and then looking outside of your school system externally, and that can include the school board to some extent because they represent the community. It sounds like there was what was overlooked included that they also weren't asking you, hey, we're considering making this decision. What might be some pieces that we need to consider as we make this decision?
Right. Or they may have, Peter, again, 25 years ago, they may have, and I didn't give them a good enough answer. I'm not sure.
Interesting.
As to what we should have done. But I will tell you that the next mistake that was made was that evening after the vote. So the vote occurred on a Thursday evening, and I left knowing that this decision was going to upset some folks. This was going to be very emotional for some folks. I didn't anticipate the level to which it was going to upset folks. For whatever reason, maybe I was a naive first-year principal, I didn't anticipate the disruption it would bring to the school day. So when I arrived at school the following morning, picketing had begun. Demonstrations had begun outside of the school. Students were gathering. Some community members were gathering. Signs had been made. Students were parading, in front of the school and were indicating that when the time came, they would refuse to enter the school and go to classes. And as you know, with any group of individuals, let alone teenagers, something of this nature can create quite a bit of excitement and can even create passion where maybe there wasn't passion previously. So I arrived at school and, dozens were already there, dozens more joined. And, staff were looking to me, and the school board was looking to me, and the superintendent was looking to me.
And you're looking back at them.
And they're saying, hey, you need to get this in order. We need to have a school day that, we need to preserve the sanctity of the school day. Students need to be in classes, and they need to understand that this decision has been made and it's time to move on. Well, that's not going to work. That approach isn't going to work, to go out with a megaphone or stand up on the park bench in front of the school and
start threatening, if you don't come inside, we're going to suspend you.
Exactly.
Which can be the decision that an inexperienced or an overwhelmed leader might make. And you can understand how they might get there. This is a disruption of the school environment. I need to do this. However, it sounds like you took a different approach. And I'd like to embed this into the question of, what did you learn about relationships? Because I think that's where you're really headed.
Yeah, it is, because, this is a scenario I give to my graduate students each semester. And it's amazing some of the suggestions that they come up with. Call the school resource officer, call the police department, make sure that those students are staying in line, tell them to get into the building, or, the news organizations showed up. Well, tell them to get off campus. And, that was just not the approach that we took. So fortunately, after a couple of mistakes that I've talked about, I think we started getting things in order. And the first thing that I did was I asked the students if there were a handful of them that they considered their representatives who would be willing to come in and sit down with me in a quiet space and talk about what it was that had been decided, what they hope to accomplish by demonstrating, and how we could get back to having a school day where people were in class and not being disruptive. And they did that. I think it was fortunate that I had been a part of the school leadership team for 4 years prior to becoming the principal, because I had relationships with the students. And so when I told them that I wanted to speak with them and see if we could work something out, they trusted me. We went in, we did that. We devised a schedule for the day whereby we were going to have an assembly at the end of the day for students to come and speak their minds and talk about how we might help them respond to the school committee's decision, while at the same time understanding that I, as the principal of the school, was going to uphold and respect the school committee's decision, and that I recognized that it was the right decision, although the timing may have been challenging for them.
At the beginning of our conversation in segment 1, you said that you brought these core values home and you started to talk about them with your wife. And she said, empathy is the one that you need to work on. You just described the most empathetic and compassionate experience in terms of bringing people in, right? Margaret Wheatley writes about this. Rutger Bregman writes about this. You get closer to people and you learn from each other to make the very best decisions, or at least to better understand. When you make decisions so far removed from individuals, it usually results in alternative narratives being written because there isn't a clear understanding. You brought them close. I think that's a really great display of empathy. My follow-up question after relationships is always, what frustrated you? It seems pretty clear what was frustrating. However, what frustrated you?
Yeah. Well, certainly I think the fact that the timing occurred the way that it did, was frustrating. If I put myself back in that situation, we had been working toward this change. It got taken out of our hands. And the expectation, everything falls on the high school principal at that point. Hey, you've got to preserve the sanctity of the school day. You've got to uphold the school committee's decision. You have to educate these students as to why the mascot needed to be changed and the fact that they need to accept this change. So that was frustrating that not only the decision had been made so quickly, but that I kind of felt like I was standing out there alone when the news organizations showed up, when the community started showing up. I was standing out there alone, literally. And I don't think that was anybody's intention. They acted with the best intentions. They wanted to make sure that all students felt safe in our schools.
With your defense of, and I will present a defense, which is they made a decision Thursday night. There wasn't a lot of time to consider what you were going to do. However, how would you respond to what would you have done differently?
Well, I really go all the way back to the first piece before the decision was made in working with the school board and the superintendent to help them understand better what the student engagement had been to that point. I must not have done that very well. As I think back on this case, had I done that effectively, then we would have made a more thoughtful decision. Or maybe they felt that I was dragging my feet. So it's possible that they had made those offers over the course of the summer, and we just hadn't gotten the students to sit down with them. I don't think that's how it is when I look back, but we certainly should have, bottom line, had more interaction between students, the community, and the policymakers. I think had we done that, we might have avoided some of the negative energy that was created by moving as quickly as we did.
In the end, what was something that was good that came out of the experience? How did this experience help you make better decisions in the future?
I would say in the immediate aftermath, relationships with students were strengthened because they felt that the school-based administration, myself as the principal, my assistant principals, my athletic director, that we had their backs, that we were empathetic, that we understood their position, yet we were still going to act with integrity and uphold the decision of the school committee and support the decision of the school committee because in the long run, it was the right thing to do. For myself personally, it further reiterated to me the importance of collaborative decision-making, whether it's determining what your mission and core values are going to be, or whether it's determining what your report card is going to look like, or whether or not you're going to have a pre-K program or world language at the elementary level. All those things need to be done collaboratively. They can't be done in silos.
My guest again today was Dr. Andrew Dolloff, Superintendent of the Yarmouth Public Schools in Yarmouth, Maine. And this has been really, really fun. I actually read John Hodgman's book, Vacation Land, and he presents his impression of Mainers, mostly summer folks in Maine and where New Yorkers invade your state. So as a native New Yorker myself, I've invaded your space a bit today and peppered you with questions, and you have treated me with the same thoughtfulness and care that you write about. And I am so grateful to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Peter. It's really been an honor, and I've enjoyed sharing a little glimpse of my mistakes and what I've learned over the past 3 or 4 decades.
Music for An Imperfect Leader was written and arranged by Ian Varley. Sam Falbo created the Daruma doll butterfly artwork. Imperfect leadership is not a scarlet letter. It is a badge of honor. It recognizes that serving as a lead learner is about being a vulnerable leader, an empathetic leader, a compassionate leader. And I'm proud to be an imperfect leader, so I hope you'll join me next time for another episode of An Imperfect Leader. Leadership in After Action. Imperfect leaders. Are you facing challenges filling open speech-language pathologist positions within your district? It's kind of a silly question because I know you are. MPAT Speech understands the critical need for qualified professionals in your schools. They recognize that communication lies at the heart of academic success, and that's why they're dedicated to helping you bridge the gap by offering expert therapists and innovative telehealth solutions. Don't let open positions hinder your students' success. Partner with MPAT Speech today and ensure every child in your district has access to the speech therapy they deserve. MPAT Speech, EMPAT Speech.com. Empowering students, empowering schools.